Fedora in the Rain by O.S. Plante. I wasn't allowed to walk for a month. A severely busted leg brought this upon me. It wasn't too bad at the beginning. I got caught up on my favorite TV shows and read a lot. But soon it got old. I was bored. Not just bored, but crazy bored. 2 weeks passed and I had nothing to do. It was then that I began looking out my third-story apartment window. I had a pleasant view into a park across the street. Right on the edge of the park sat an old, somewhat dilapidated bench. As I watched this bench, a man with a wonderful fedora, I was rather envious of it, came and sat down. He held a newspaper, and then he just sat there. It was almost an hour of staring at the same page of his newspaper, and every so often checking his watch. After a while, he stood up and left. I soon forgot about him and continued to sulk about the boredom that I now had to deal with. The next day the man was back. He still wore his fedora. He was carrying that day's newspaper, though. He sat on the same bench and stared at a single newspaper page, checking his watch more often than the day before. I soon found that this man sat on that bench every day. He wore the same fedora, placed carefully at a slight angle on his head. After a week or two, I finally got a good look at his face. He was a dark-skinned man with wrinkled skin. His face was clean-shaven and a round pair of glasses magnified his narrow eyes. He looked weary. Each day he grew more and more agitated and impatient. I supposed him to be waiting for someone or something. I wasn't quite sure which it was. I thought maybe he was a drug dealer, but there was something about him that seemed too honest. He was hurting. At least that is the impression I got from him. I wasn't quite sure what to make of him. I was beginning to think that maybe I should stop watching the man. It felt like an invasion of privacy. After a while, I once again forgot about him as I began to heal and was allowed to move around more. Soon it was time to begin therapy and walking again, and he was erased from my mind altogether. That is, until the one morning. I woke to large drops pattering against my window. I looked outside and there was the man sitting on the bench. He was stooped over with his newspaper in his lap. As I watched, the man stood and placed his fedora on the bench. The man turned so that his face was towards my window. Wet drops clung to the lens of his glasses. They could have been tears, but it was hard to tell with all the rain. The man took one last look at the fedora on the bench, and then tucked his newspaper under his arm and walked away, his shoulders slumped in sorrow. I tried to forget about the man, but every time I looked out the window, I saw the fedora getting further drenched by the rain. As evening arrived, I finally gave in and made my way down to the bench. It felt strange, standing by the bench I had been watching for so long. It felt like I was entering the man's home without his permission. Water was pooling in the dinted top of the fedora. I hesitated before picking the hat up. As I gently drained the water, something caught my eye. A folded piece of paper lay on the bench where I had picked up the fedora. The man must have placed it beneath the fedora in an attempt to keep it dry. For the most part, it had worked, but for the few drops now splattered on it. I picked up the paper. I didn't know what to do. So I did what I think anyone else would have done if they had been in the same situation. I unfolded the paper. 4 words greeted me. I still love you. That was it. No explanation, no name. Just 4 words that meant the world to this man. Who was he? I don't know. Who did he love? I didn't know that either. I just knew he loved unconditionally. I want to be more like this man.